My mother-in-law, who came to my mother's funeral, grinned and said,
"This house will be inherited by my son. I wonder if I should take this room."
I replied, Actually, I'm the one inheriting this house." She retorted,
"I know, but isn't it true that a wife's belongings belong to her husband? So, in essence, this house belongs to my son, right?"
I sighed. Is that really the case? She cheerfully added,
"From now on, let's get along."
I hesitated. What do you mean by get along? She declared.
"I mean turning this room into my room."
I asked, does that mean we'll be living together? She confidently replied,
"Exactly. I've decided. With such a splendid house, it'd be a waste to have empty rooms when two people can live here, don't you think?"
Despite my recent loss, my mother-in-law seemed blissfully unaware of my grief. Why would she bring this up now? Can't she see the sadness on my face? It's no time for jokes. This house holds precious memories. It was built by my respected father and was my mother's cherished home. I don't want my unreasonable mother-in-law to live here. And my husband, who doesn't stop it, is equally at fault. To prevent my precious home from being tainted, I decided to take the initiative before moving out. I am a 42-year-old office worker. Having missed the timing for marriage and still being single after turning 40, I had given up on the idea of getting married. However, through an acquaintance's introduction, I met Michael, who is 4 years younger than me, and we were able to get married. My husband is a kind person who prioritizes my opinions. Where should we go for our honeymoon? You mentioned that Europe would be nice, right? I asked.
But didn't you say you preferred the Maldives? Let's go to the Maldives.
My husband replied.
My mom wants to live with us. My dad's health isn't great, and it seems my mom is finding it challenging to manage alone.
He explained. I understand that your mom is going through a tough time, but didn't we agree not to live together before we got married?
You're right. I'll talk to my mom about it.
My husband always listens to my whims, and I often feel guilty about it. Meeting a good person is a joy, but there's one regret. My father passed away 3 years before I got married, so I couldn't show him my wedding and reassure him. My father was a strict executive at a small and medium enterprise, and I deeply respected him. Despite the modest size of the company, his income was decent, and our family home was sizable enough to hold a funeral. As I began working as an office employee, I gained a deeper understanding of the challenges of work, which only increased my admiration for my father. And then, 2 years after our marriage, my mother also passed away. Even Mom? My husband asked.
Are you okay? Shouldn't you take a break in the back room?
Funerals are generally less commonly held at home, but my mother's funeral was conducted at home. During my mother's funeral, he always looked out for me. Truly, I was fortunate to have met such a good husband. That's when my mother-in-law, Nancy, arrived.
My deepest condolences. I sincerely sympathize with you.
I replied. Thank you. I hadn't lived together with my mother-in-law, and our interactions had been limited, maintaining a reasonable distance. However, it was during my mother's funeral that I glimpsed her true nature. After the funeral, my mother-in-law approached me. It wasn't strange for her to come to me, but her expression was oddly gleeful. We greatly appreciate your assistance during this funeral. Thanks to you, we were able to smoothly complete the ceremony. Then she said,
The funeral is over now. isn't it? Enough with the formalities.
I was taken aback. Initially, I thought my mother-in-law was trying to be kind, considering my grief. But it became clear that wasn't the case.
Your parents had such a splendid house.
I replied. Wait a moment. She boldly walked into the depths of the house. Oh. Mom, this is inconvenient. Some areas are messy. I protested. Undeterred, she declared.
Don't fuss over details. More importantly, this house will be inherited by my son. I wonder if I should take this room.
I hesitated. Mom. Actually, I'm the one inheriting this house. She smirked.
I know. Your parents didn't have any other children, right? And isn't a wife's belongings her husband's? So, in essence, this house belongs to my son, doesn't it?
I sighed. Is that really the case? She cheerfully added.
From now on, let's get along.
I hesitated. What do you mean by get along? She confidently replied.
I mean turning this room into my room. After all, you and Michael will move here later, won't you?
I asked. Does that mean we'll be living together? She declared.
Exactly. I've decided. With such a splendid house, it'd be a waste to have empty rooms when two people can live here. Finally, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself.
Unfortunately, my mother recently passed away, and yet my mother-in-law is saying such things. Can't she see the sadness on my face? I'm gradually getting angry with her. Even though my mother's funeral has just concluded, why would she joke around at a time like this? At that moment, it seemed my conversation with my mother-in-law caught my husband's attention. He stepped in.
Mom! What are you saying? This isn't the right time for such discussions.
My mother-in-law retorted.
Why make such a fuss?
But my husband was firm.
Enough! Just leave.
He escorted her out of the house.
Sorry. My mom can be unreasonable.
He apologized. It's fine. Thanks to you for handling it, I replied. At that moment, I felt grateful for my dependable husband. However, I would later realize that the reason my husband scolded my mother-in-law was subtly different from my own perspective. 10 days after my mother's funeral, as things settled down a bit, we decided to discuss my family home. It was then that my husband made an unexpected proposal. This apartment is cramped. Shouldn't we move back to my parents' house? I suggested.
Yeah, you're right. With more belongings and the possibility of having kids, it's better than squeezing into this tiny apartment.
He agreed. Well, then we should start preparing for the move. Then he said hesitantly.
So, I have one thing to discuss regarding the move.
What's the matter? I asked. He hesitated before saying.
Considering the spacious house, all the empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us.
Wait, are you suggesting we live together? I asked, surprised. My husband is kind, but recently, I've noticed something. While I thought he always prioritized my opinions, I wonder if he's actually just a yes man. Could he be an outright pushover? His suggestion about living with my mother-in-law, and the way he complies with her requests for my persuasion, makes me wonder. Moreover, despite knowing I'm against cohabitation, he repeatedly proposes it to me, prioritizing her over me. Haven't I said it repeatedly? We won't live together. I remind him. He responds.
But Mom keeps insisting on it.
I counter. During the funeral, you scolded her, didn't you? You stood up for me and opposed cohabitation.
Well, yes, I was upset about her barging into the house, but that doesn't mean I'm entirely against living together. I just thought such an important decision shouldn't be made casually in that setting.
It was decisive. My husband merely nods and relays my words, but he seems more inclined toward my mother-in-law. Moreover, despite advocating for proper discussions, he maintains a certain distance and avoids making definitive decisions. Perhaps he's unconsciously doing this, believing he remains neutral. People of this type can be quite tricky. They convince themselves they're neutral and capable of making the right judgments. It's frustrating. Anyway, I oppose living with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in this room. I've said it before, and I won't change my stance. Please convey this to your mom. My husband responds.
Why? You seem really bothered by it. Fine, I'll let her know.
While I'd prefer to avoid living with my in-laws, I've prepared myself for the possibility, depending on the circumstances when we got married. However, witnessing my mother-in-law's behavior during my mother's funeral, can I imagine living together in the cherished home my respected father built and where my mother lived? Now that I've become aware of my husband's lack of assertiveness, cohabitation is unthinkable. When my husband conveyed my opposition to cohabitation, my mother-in-law directly protested by calling me.
Why are you opposing cohabitation when there's such a spacious house? You're Michael's wife now, and his father and I are your parents, right? Why such strong opposition to living together with us?
I've already declined cohabitation before. I apologize.
My husband has mobility issues, and it's challenging for me alone. Are you saying you'll abandon us?
Did you hear the reasons from my husband? I apologize, but...
This heartless person! I won't ask anything of you anymore.
I feel sorry for my father-in-law's health condition. However, based on my mother-in-law's past behavior, I can imagine a future where everything related to my father-in-law would be pushed onto me if we were to live together. If we do decide to live together, significant improvement in my husband and mother-in-law's mindset is an absolute requirement. A few days after my mother-in-law called me heartless, my husband suddenly started rearranging the living room, moving the sofa, tables, and creating space. What are you doing? Is this for storing moving boxes? I asked. He replied.
No, I'm planning to make space for 2 beds here.
The mention of 2 beds filled me with a sense of dread. I cautiously asked, "Are your parents coming to stay?" He responded,
No, they're moving in starting today, even before the move.
"This is truly the worst. Despite my opposition to cohabitation, my husband and mother-in-law have forced it upon me. She told me that she would no longer rely on me, but it seems she is now turning to my husband instead. Why is this happening?" I questioned. He explained.
Their lease is up, so we decided they'd move here without renewing. It'll be cramped for 4 people, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while.
But that's not what I meant. Why is cohabitation even on the table? I've said it before, I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in this room.
I'll make sure to talk to Mom. We'll be living together from now on, so please get along.
Why do you prioritize everything your mom says? I asked. He clarified.
It's not about prioritizing her. I listened to both of your opinions and made a judgment.
My husband, the ultimate yes man when it comes to my mother-in-law, seems to have fallen for her cohabitation strategy. Perhaps he's unwittingly swayed by her, believing he's making independent judgments. I used to think of my husband as kind and good-hearted, but when paired with my mother-in-law, he becomes quite a handful. And so, I find myself forced into cohabitation with my in-laws.
Welcome.
As I suspected, this apartment is cramped for 4 adults.
We'll endure it until the move.
It's infuriating. She just rolled in here, and now she's complaining about the room.
I apologize for suddenly adding 2 elderly people. We'll try not to inconvenience you.
No, if there's any inconvenience due to your mobility issues, please let us know. My father-in-law, Tony, has mobility issues, but he seems better than expected. He experiences mild discomfort when standing up, but nothing severe. Was my mother-in-law genuinely struggling to care for him? He's polite and even offered to handle what he can on his own. Unlike my mother-in-law, my father-in-law doesn't seem problematic. Or so I thought.
Is there a drugstore nearby? It seems I forgot to bring my medicated patch with me, and I'd like to buy one.
Hold on, dear. Considering your mobility issues, you should stay put. If you fall outside, it'll inconvenience Michael and the others, won't it? Ask them to buy the medicated patch for you.
But I've been going to buy it myself until now.
Didn't they tell you to let them know if you face any inconvenience?
Well, I guess you're right. Sorry, but I need it urgently. Could you go buy it for me?
Sigh. Understood. While running an errand for a medicated patch isn't a big deal, why does my mother-in-law make decisions without involving me in the conversation? Also, my father-in-law appears polite on the surface, but he seems to follow my mother-in-law's lead. Like my husband, he's become her yes man. This time it's a minor errand, but as we continue living together, I fear everything will eventually be pushed onto me. Can I allow these people to live in the cherished home my parents left behind? It's no joke. If they move in, they'll tarnish the house. I must find a way to protect my parents' home. As my mother-in-law and father-in-law prepared for their move to my parents' home, I decided to take preemptive action before their relocation. My mother-in-law was in high spirits, excited about moving to a spacious house.
Hey, can you lend us the key to your parents' house? We'd like to check out our rooms.
I have some errands to run, so I'll give the key to Michael.
Michael, can you drop us off? Before heading home, we want to stop by the storage room where we dumped our belongings. We need to measure the furniture sizes.
Got it. I'll take the key.
With my mother-in-law's good mood, there were no clashes between us, and about 10 days passed uneventfully. However, behind the scenes, my preparations were progressing steadily.
All right. The moving preparations are complete.
Soon, life in that house will begin.
Once my husband and my in-laws finished their moving preparations, it was time for me to reveal a shocking truth to the 3 of them. Everyone, I have something to discuss. My husband replied.
What is it? Get to the point.
My mother-in-law wondered.
Is it about plans for celebrating our move?
I clarified. No, we won't be moving to that house. She exclaimed.
What? What do you mean?
I handed over a document. This is an application for renouncing my inheritance. My husband protested.
Renouncing your inheritance? Come on, that's a joke, right?
I insisted. It's not a joke. Look, there's an official court approval here. For me, that house holds immense sentimental value. I couldn't bear the thought of you living there. So, I decided to let go of the house, preserving it as a beautiful memory in my heart. My mother-in-law scolded.
What madness possessed you? Even if you were letting it go, you could have sold it for money. Why abandon the house?
I explained. Even if I sold it, you'd just rely on that money next. I thought it'd be clearer if I simply had nothing. She retorted.
We moved out of our previous place for this move. You know? What are you doing? How will you make it up to us?
I stood my ground. I've consistently opposed cohabitation. Yet, without proper discussion, you forced it upon me. So, I took a firm stance. Upon learning that I had renounced my inheritance, both my husband and mother-in-law seemed stunned, their faces drained of color. They were speechless, their strength sapped. My father-in-law looked bewildered as he observed the two of them. However, I wasn't about to let up. Michael, I continued. I've been thinking about getting a divorce. What do you think?
Huh? Divorce?
My husband stammered.
Michael! You should divorce this ridiculous wife immediately.
My mother-in-law chimed in. I had anticipated her immediate demand for divorce. What I wanted to confirm was whether my husband could make an independent decision at this critical moment. If he deferred to my mother-in-law now, it would make our future together even more challenging.
Even if you're suddenly asked about divorce, it's troubling, Mom?
My husband mumbled. His response was still pending, but my resolve to proceed with the divorce had solidified. My mother-in-law snapped.
Fine. Divorce is the only option.
My father-in-law interjected.
Michael, it can't be helped. Your mom insists.
My husband sighed.
Well, you seem to want a divorce too, and maybe that's for the best.
Even in significant decisions, my husband and father-in-law remained yes-men to my mother-in-law. And now, my husband's words made it sound as if he changed his opinion for my sake. Very well, I declared. Let's proceed with the divorce. I'll be moving out. With minimal belongings, I spent the night at a budget hotel. The next day, I had urgent matters to attend to, so I took half a day off work and headed back to the courthouse. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me.
You! What's going on? It seems that house is becoming yours.
Why the sudden outburst? Did you find out through the estate division process? Yes, that house belongs to me.
You forged documents and deceived us.
Why would I forge documents meant for court submission? Those are genuine.
Then why is the house becoming yours when you were supposed to renounce the inheritance?
Well, right after that, I promptly withdrew the application. You know. Renouncing an inheritance is difficult once the application is accepted. However, it takes about a month for the renunciation application to be accepted, during which time it can be withdrawn at any point. The documents I showed my in-laws were not acceptance related. They were from the application stage. I intentionally made them believe I had relinquished the house and confronted them with the prospect of divorce to gauge their reactions and decide my next steps. I didn't expect my mother-in-law's mindset to change, but I hoped my husband would reconsider and express that he didn't want a divorce. If he said he didn't want a divorce, I planned to rethink it and later explain about the house. However,
So the house really becomes yours? Then, since it was acquired before the divorce, it's subject to property division, right? In such cases, you two are supposed to split the money from selling it, don't you?
my mother-in-law seemed intent on taking whatever she could from me, knowing the house wouldn't be hers. But I had anticipated this. If that house were jointly acquired by us, it would indeed be considered shared property. However, that house is a unique asset acquired through inheritance, so it won't be subject to property division. Unfortunately, specific assets like this aren't eligible for division. When you heard that the house would become mine, didn't you consult with a lawyer? If Michael had paid off the house loan or covered renovation costs, those expenses might have been considered for division, but I assume that didn't happen, right?
So, what about the money that would come to Michael through property division?
Well, we've only been married for a few years, so there's hardly anything substantial. Maybe just the car? Although there's still an outstanding loan on it.
You're going to selfishly claim the inheritance, aren't you? Heartless.
I'm protecting that house because it holds precious memories of my parents. I don't want people like you living there. If you have any further complaints, please go through a lawyer. After the call with my mother-in-law, divorce proceedings proceeded smoothly. Presumably, she urged my husband to divorce me promptly. Regardless, the divorce was finalized, and I no longer had to contend with my in-laws. I felt a sense of relief, as if I'd successfully safeguarded my father's home from harm. After I moved out, my former in-laws apparently spent some time in the apartment where my ex-husband and I used to live. The apartment wasn't very spacious, so even with one less person, it must have felt quite cramped. My former mother-in-law explored new housing options, but due to their age, my ex-husband's parents faced challenges passing rental application screenings. Consequently, my ex-husband decided to rent a smaller single-family home for them to live together. Although it's smaller, it's still a house, so the rent is likely higher than what they paid for the apartment. He'll also need to support his parents going forward. My ex-husband is probably in for a challenging life. My former mother-in-law was excited about moving into the large house my father left behind, but now she's settling for a considerably smaller home. I imagine she's quite disappointed. As for me, I've started a new life in the house my parents left behind. It feels warm, as if my parents are still there with me.
How did you find this story? If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time.